Hey friends, welcome back to Six Hearts on Six Acres. My name is Bree and I'm so glad that you're here with me today. Throughout the last month, I have been sharing all of my family's recipes with you, everything that we have eaten, and you've seen that I've used sourdough multiple times, and many of you have asked for a sourdough video or any of my tips and tricks. So I thought that I would do a big bake day and kind of show you what I make with my sourdough starter, how I use it, how I feed it, what my routine is, and how to make it work for your family simply. I know the thought of having to keep a sourdough starter alive and thriving can be overwhelming, but it does not have to be. Sourdough has been used for thousands of years by people who didn't have weigh scales, who didn't have a clock set for every 15-minute stretch and folds, who didn't have like a deeply ingrained sourdough routine. It was a simple way to feed their family bread, and you can use those exact same ideas. Now, I do use a food scale for a lot of my recipes. It just seems to be easier, but it's definitely not necessary. All right, so in the beginning of this video, you saw that huge bowl of bubbly active starter. I don't typically make my active starter in a bowl, but because I was doing this big bake day, it was not all going to fit into a jar, so I just did it that way. And unless you also plan on having a huge bake day, you don't ever need that much starter. Because you guys have seen me make several regular bowls, I decided to do an inclusion bowl, and this time I wanted to do a tomato, basil, and mozzarella artisan loaf. It turned out absolutely amazing. I replaced the water in that recipe with some of my homemade spaghetti sauce. And when I tell you the color of that loaf and the smell in my kitchen was absolutely incredible. We are moving on to a new recipe for me. This is a sourdough sandwich loaf. My kids have been requesting this because I've told you multiple times that we pack our lunches, and sometimes they want a sandwich without that hard crust that you get from the sourdough bowl. This is a soft, fluffy loaf of sandwich bread, and we have eaten it now by the time I'm showing you this video, and it tastes amazing. The basis for any loaf of sourdough, no matter what you're making, is starter, water, and flour. And you're going to see me every single time I add my starter to my bowl, and then I add my water and mix it together until it is well incorporated and the starter is kind of just formed into that liquid mixture. You don't want to add your flour until that happens, because then you just get clumps of everything and it's a lot harder to mix in. Once you add your flour, you're going to mix it well until you get what is called a shaggy dough. That's what I just showed you on that batch of focaccia dough I'm making. That is a dough that is wet and sticky and messy. That's exactly what you're going for. So when you get that, cover up your dough and let it set. We are moving right along into our third dough, and this dough right here just proves how simple and forgiving sourdough is. So I'm making a blueberry bagel loaf, and I dry canned these blueberries and they have a lot of liquid in them, and so I planned to use that liquid as my water, but I completely forgot and added the right amount of water. So I went and dumped some of it out and just added those blueberries in, and you'll see as I'm mixing it together, first it was too dry, so I added some extra water, and then I got it too wet, so I added some extra flour. These bagels still turned out incredible, and sourdough is just really forgiving. If you need to add flour or water during the process, I have always found it to work just fine and not mess up my end result at all. I am going to top these blueberry bagels with some cream cheese and some of my dandelion jelly that I canned, and they are going to be so amazing. I did make a double batch because they also freeze really well, and so obviously I'm making a huge amount of sourdough today. This is not all going to be eaten immediately. A lot of it will go straight into the freezer. Next up is a sourdough pizza crust. This recipe is super quick and easy as well, and has all of those same base ingredients with the added touch of a little bit of honey. You can also add a little bit of olive oil to this recipe if you would like, but I was completely out. This recipe said that it made 1 large crust or 3 individual crusts, but I was able to get 2 large crusts out of this very easily. Now that I have all of my doughs mixed up, I am moving on to my stretch and folds. So stretch and folds are what is going to take your shaggy sourdough mixture and turn it into a smooth, strong dough with good gluten development. All you do is grab with wet hands, by the way, grab one side of your dough, pull it up and turn it over on itself. Continue turning your bowl and do this to every single side of your sourdough. A lot of recipes I read say to do this every 15 minutes for 4 times. I have found in my loaves that this is not necessary. I usually do it at least twice, sometimes 3 times, and I definitely don't stick to a 15-minute time clock. I just do it again when I have a minute. So sometimes it is 15-ish minutes, sometimes it's less than that, and sometimes it's over an hour later. I have not noticed a difference. The night is coming to an end, and I have used almost all of my sourdough starters, so I am ready to get it fed and get it built back up. Like I've told you, sourdough is so easy. All you're going to do is start with your leftover sourdough starter. Some people call this discard. You're going to feed it with flour and water. Now, you've probably heard, if you've looked into sourdough starter, about a 1-to-1 ratio. When you're starting out, and when I started out, this is how I fed my starter. So I weighed out the amount of starter I had, and then I fed it an equal amount of flour, unbleached flour, and water. I don't do that anymore. I like to give my starter a bigger feed, but I don't measure it out, so I can't even tell you the ratio. I go by look and by feel. I showed you the texture there of what I like. It's kind of a really thick pancake batter texture, and that is what works perfect for me. I have found that the less you feed it, so if you do like a 1-to-1 ratio, that it needs to be fed sometimes twice a day, and I definitely don't have time for that. So doing the bigger feeding really works great for my schedule. Also, when you have a wetter dough, I notice when it starts to get hungry that it really gives off a strong acetone smell, which I absolutely hate. It turns my stomach. And so if that happens, there's nothing wrong with your starter. It just means that it's hungry. So give it a good feed. Sometimes to get rid of the smell, it takes me 2 to 3 feeds. But it does eventually go away, and your starter is usable even when it has this smell. The first dough there I started working with this morning was that pizza dough. All I did was knead it just a few times, split it in half, wrap it in plastic wrap, and throw it in the fridge because I am not ready to use it yet. If you were ready, it is ready to go ahead and bake at this point, but it also lasts in the fridge or even in the freezer. Next up is our focaccia dough. Now, focaccia dough is not a different recipe. It is just my regular sour bread recipe that I use as the base for all of my loaves, except we are going to let it ferment on the counter for an extra long time until it overproofs. It's going to get pillowy and have tons of bubbles and be very soft. Focaccia bread and a good salad are one of my most favorite meals. Next up is this tomato, basil, and mozzarella artisan loaf. With this loaf, I'm going to show you how to do inclusions, and this is how I do inclusions on any loaf. So you very gently turn your dough out of your bowl, and then without flattening it out, because you don't want to push down on all of that nice leaven and bubbles that you've got in there, you just stretch it into a rectangle and then add your inclusion. For me, I'm doing mozzarella cheese and the Italian seasoning blend that we made in our Christmas video. You then fold up one side of your dough into thirds, and then you have a new blank slate that you're going to add your inclusions to again. The same thing, and then you're going to do the same thing on the other third. Fold that over and load it up with inclusions as well. Doing your inclusions this way gets your entire loaf just loaded with whatever ingredient you're adding in. And then this loaf is ready to be shaped. So I have found the best way is to start away from you and just very gently but tightly roll that loaf. And then using like a candy cane motion, so you're going to push up and draw back You're just going to shape that loaf. When you have inclusions that are thick, like chocolate chips or something like mozzarella cheese like this, you don't want to do this too many times because those inclusions will get pushed to the outside of your loaf and then they will burn. So just do it a few times and then it is ready to go in your banneton. I like to dust my banneton with rice flour. It keeps that loaf from sticking to the banneton liner, and it creates like a really pretty white color on the outside of your loaf. This loaf is now ready to be moved into the fridge, and it can stay there for anywhere from 12 hours all the way up to 36 hours. The longer it sits, the more tang it's going to develop as it ferments, so the more like sour taste it will get. I really like that flavor, and I have not found that they have like an incredibly sour taste even with 3 days. That fermentation time is what allows them to really develop the pre and probiotics that make sourdough so healthy for your body. The loaf of sandwich bread has been rising for about 3 hours now, and I'm showing you how tall it is. Honestly, I would have liked to have been about an inch over the glass baking dish, but I was running out of time because I had a lot to do today, so I went ahead and baked it. It still turned out great, but it would have been better with a little bit more rise on it. You see me here dumping out some of my starter into a little condiment cup. I am so very thankful for the person that shared their starter with me, and I try to pass this on as much as I can. Anytime I hear of somebody that needs a sourdough starter local to me, you bet that I am volunteering. It costs you nothing to share this starter. So lots of my friends have a starter that came from my home. Today we are working on a recipe that I want to use for my daughter's class party for Valentine's Day. So we're making some sourdough blackberry pop-tarts. These tasted amazing and they're so stinking cute. I'm so excited to get a whole big batch of them made for her class. I know they're going to love them. This was really easy to make, and this is a recipe that you could use discarded instead of active starter. Active starter is what I had handy at the time, but you don't need that for this recipe as you're not going to give it time to ferment and properly leaven anyways. Also, did you spy that huge bottle of vanilla? I'm so excited that my vanilla has now been sitting for a year and is ready to use in all of my recipes. And of course, I bought another batch of beans and another giant bottle of vodka, and I will be making a video to show you how to make your own vanilla. It tastes so much better than store-bought, plus it's way less expensive. This dough came together really well. It's not your typical pie crust dough. Honestly, it's like almost a mixture between a sugar cookie and a pie crust, but it worked out really well. I was a little bit curious to see how it would do, but it was nice and smooth and really easy to roll out and easy to work with. Of course, this is for a Valentine's Day party that I am trying out, so I made these heart-shaped. You definitely don't have to do that. You could go easy with the traditional just rectangles and cut them out with like a pizza cutter or a knife, but this just added some extra cuteness to it, so I wanted to do that. I put about a tablespoon of my homemade blackberry jelly on each of these and then wiped the edges with a bit of water and topped them with the other crust. And then I used a fork to just crimp the edges all together. I did still have a little bit of leakage of the blackberry jam once these baked, so next time I may use a tiny bit less jam, but otherwise I wouldn't change a single thing about this recipe. This recipe just used an egg yolk, so I saved the egg white and made an egg wash to brush the tops of these so they would turn nice and golden brown while they bake. I am going to experiment with these and make tons of different flavors. I think brown sugar cinnamon is going to be one of the next ones that I make. They were just really good and really fun, and I feel like it's going to be a cool breakfast for the kids to have. Pop-Tarts aren't something that I ever buy in this house, and so I think my kids are really going to love having these. My tomato, basil, and mozzarella loaf has been chilling for about 12 hours now, so I am ready to get it scored and get it in the oven. You saw that I threw my Dutch oven in there to preheat while I was getting this scored. You always want to bake your bread in a hot Dutch oven, and I'm just doing a super simple cross score with just a few decorative details on the side with this. I did dust it with that rice flour. If you dust it with just regular flour, it ends up like cooking into the dough, and so it doesn't have that white floury crust that really accents your scoring. Once you've baked your bread for 25 minutes, you take the lid off and you get your first sneak peek. And I was just overjoyed with how beautiful this loaf of bread was. I wanted to just decorate these Pop-Tarts a little bit, so I mixed up a glaze of just powdered sugar and heavy cream, and I put that on top of these Pop-Tarts and topped them with a few little Valentine's Day sprinkles. They turned out so cute. Next up, I'm going to start working on this bagel dough, and I want you to remember that this is the dough that I had my water measurement incorrect, and so you'll see that it is a little bit wetter than all the other bagel doughs that I've made, but it's still really easy to work with, and they still turned out excellent. Like I told you, I doubled my recipe, so I just went ahead and split this in half so I could work with one chunk of it at a time, just to make it easier in the space that I had. I like to form my dough into a circle so I can easily get it cut into 8 sections without having to measure anything. I know some people get their scale out at this point and measure to make sure that all of their dough for each bagel weighs the same. And maybe if you're selling, that is important, or if you are a type A personality. I am definitely not, though, and I don't care if they're the exact same size, so I just do this by looks. Once they're all shaped, you put them into boiling water. This boiling water has a little bit of baking soda and a little bit of honey in it to just really create that nice shiny glaze on the outside. I boil these for about a minute and then pull them out and set them on a parchment paper lined baking sheet. Top them with an egg wash so they get nice and brown. Do you see how bright yellow that yolk is? A friend of mine gave me some of her eggs. Her chickens aren't slacking quite as hard as mine are, but I was so thankful to have some farm fresh eggs again. And then you just bake those for 20 minutes. While the bagels are baking, I'm going to get started on my focaccia dough. The possibilities are endless when it comes to topping your focaccia dough, but I have this basil and shishito pepper pesto that I made from my summer garden, and I wanted to use it on here. This really just gave such a beautiful summery taste, and I made me really be ready for my summer garden. This pesto is so good. And then I topped that with some Parmesan cheese and some salt. And then I covered it back up and let it just sit on the counter for a little bit longer so it could continue to rise. Are these not the most beautiful, fluffy blueberry bagels you have ever seen? I kept my oven running all day, so when these bagels were ready to come out, I threw that focaccia dough in, and then it was ready not too much longer later. This focaccia dough is so soft and fluffy, but with crispy edges. It's really amazing. At this point, we are ready for some dinner. I've been in the kitchen working all day long, and so we are going to make a pizza with some of that sourdough pizza crust that we had sitting in the refrigerator. This pizza dough is really easy to work with. Sometimes when you're spreading out your pizza dough like this, you have, or I personally have had a hard time getting it shaped. It kind of rebounds a little bit, or it's not quite as soft. This dough was perfect, and I didn't have any of that problem though. We are, of course, using our homemade spaghetti sauce to top this pizza. And then I threw on onions, bell peppers, mushrooms, and pepperoni, and then some fresh mozzarella cheese. This is a pizza that you can feel good about putting into your body. It is not loaded with garbage. It's not loaded with seed oils. There's honestly actually no extra fat. I didn't even put olive oil in the crust. It wasn't greasy. It wasn't heavy. It did not make our stomach hurt. This is real, whole, healthy food, and I am so thankful to be able to feed my family in this way. I accidentally ruined my pizza stone, and so I do need to invest in another one of those for a super crispy crust. But either way, this pizza was absolutely delicious. My loaf of bread has cooled and I am ready to cut it open. Look at the color of the inside of this loaf. It is so beautiful, and that marbling of the mozzarella cheese and the herbs is just incredible. I can't wait to eat it. If you have tried to cut sourdough bread, you know that it can sometimes be a struggle. The crust is really crispy and delicious, but it makes it hard to cut. Pico Haas was nice enough to send me one of their knives to try out. This is their bread knife, and it works amazing trying to cut this bread. So much better than any other knife that I have used previously. This company was launched in 2018 by two German men who were set on creating a high quality knife that was both beautiful and functional. And I would definitely say that they were very successful and recommend this knife to anybody who is looking for a new bread knife to cut their sourdough bread. Obviously, it worked really well on this sandwich bread as well, but it was not much of a challenge to cut as it was super soft. And I'm going to cut into this focaccia bread as well, just so you can see how soft and pillowy the inside of this dough is. If this video was helpful to you, please let me know in the comments, and I will definitely be sharing more sourdough recipes with you. Until I see you next time, may God bless.